The CoinWeek podcast is brought to you by CAC, a name trusted by collectors who understand that the best insurance in today's numismatic marketplace is the peace of mind that comes from knowing that your coin is quality for the grade. CAC coins bring higher prices at auction and help level the playing field between coins graded by PCGS and NGC. You want quality coins in your collection, so before you buy, ask your dealer to show you his or her selection of CAC-approved coins. In this episode of the CoinWeek podcast, Daniel Sedwick joins us to talk ingots, coinage of the Western Hemisphere, and touch on some of the amazing lots that will be up for sale later this week at Daniel Frank Sedwick's November 2018 Treasure Auction. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for joining me on the CoinWeek podcast.
No problem. My pleasure.
I think it's good timing to have you on because, your auction firm, Daniel Frank Sedwick, is about to have its largest treasure auction of the year, just set to take place starting on November 2 and end on November 5. And you have a number of important lots that I want to discuss while I had you here. But before we get into that, I wanted to get your gauge on how the world coin and treasure coin market is doing right now as we close out 2018?
Well, okay. Generally, things really have not changed much from my perspective. We do have a few segments of the business that depend on other markets like the metals market and real estate and stocks and bonds, just in as much as what those markets do kind of give people a general feeling as to what kind of expendable income they have for things like coins. But then that's counterbalanced by the people who treat coins as investments themselves. At the end of the day, from our perspective, we sell to people who are true collectors. They are collecting as hobbyists, and it's a means of enjoyment for them while at the same time they spend money and get the money back and then some down the line. So really not much has changed. We see a lot of strength in a lot of areas that we handle. A lot of that is because of our own cultivation of it and the fact that the better the coins we get, the better the bidders we get. And then the better the bidders we get, the better the coins we get from consignment. So it just kind of perpetuates. And hasn't been much change is the short answer.
I think one of the benefits of the niche in which your firm operates, which I would think would be typically coins of the Western Hemisphere, dating back to the earliest years of European exploration and exploitation of it to the present, is that I think collectors in the Americas resoundingly understand the significance of this material. And it is all part of a shared cultural history that seems to resonate more and more as the demographics in America become more blended. One such area where this has clearly been the case for many years now is with pre-revolutionary Cuban coinage. These are issues that were struck by the United States Mint in Philadelphia. They feature a pleasing yet simple and straightforward design, and these coins have a passionate and devoted following in the United States. You have a set of Cuban coins that I don't think much is known about in this auction, and I think it'll be an exciting first opportunity for a serious collector to take something home that is truly remarkable.
Well, I'll start with the second half, answering to where the collectors come from. And in general, you're right. I mean, the United States is the biggest coin collector market in the world. But from my perspective, I see a lot of collectors from all over the world. And there's, in the type of stuff that we deal in, as you say, mostly Western Hemisphere material, we have collectors in Russia, China, Australia, South Africa, just anywhere in the world, It's not just the U.S., mostly because there's a lot of romance to the type of material that we have. But then when you get into the more modern Latin American material, a lot of that is struck in the United States, or was struck in the United States, and the Cuban coins are a perfect example. They were designed by the well-known engraver Barber and struck at the Philadelphia Mint. So it's very easy to see why there would be crossover interest there. That said, So far, the greatest interest I have seen in these pieces has come from the Cuban collectors themselves. Obviously, I'm not talking about Cubans in Cuba buying and bidding, but I'm talking about Cuban expatriates who reside throughout the Caribbean or in Latin America or even in the United States. And I think that's been the biggest draw. I think you touched on that a little bit too, is that there's so much Latin presence in the United States that as the families become more affluent, certainly their ability to and interest in to buy rare coins from their mother countries, that it's there. Now, as far as the Cuban set goes, what we've got is something unique. When it came to us, we had an idea that it was something very special, but we had to do some research to confirm that. It's well known that in 1915 and 1916, when Cuba became an independent republic, they had the Philadelphia Mint strike coins for them, both in silver and gold. And there's a well-known proof. There are well-known proofs too, and then also some very high-grade circulation issues that the Cuban collectors have gone crazy over the years, and of course, as you say, United States collectors as well. But what we came across for this auction are pieces that are graded specifically as specimens, and the question becomes, what is a specimen? And the distinction really actually depends on which service you're talking about, PCGS or NGC. And in this particular case, these are NGC graded pieces. The top coin in the group to start off the auction in that section is lot 146. It's a 20 pesos 1915 specimen, NGC specimen 63. Best that we can tell, what sets this apart as a specimen is that the surfaces are clearly specially prepared. You see polished lines, and you see little imperfections like a struck through fiber or things like that. But the details are exceptionally strong. The edges are quite a bit more raised than normal. Definitely not a proof, but clearly not a production issue either. Each one of the coins in this set, which is, we've got the 20, 10, and I believe it's the 5 that's not actually a specimen, but is instead the finest known mint state grade. Then I think it's 4, 2, and 1 pesos. Each one of them is a little bit different, but each one of them is noticeably different from a production issue piece. And they're all in very high grade as well. But something like this, where you're talking about a U.S. Mint product for a very popular series with lots of collectors in a unique format, it's very exciting to think what might happen at auction. And the consignor was, I think, very smart to put it up for auction instead of to try to find a private buyer, because when it comes to auction, you just never know what's going to happen. So we're very excited to see that.
Well, when you consider that the 1916 2 peso proof did almost $90,000 at auction a few years ago, that coin had a mintage of 8. And for that reason, it'll be very exciting to see how this lot plays out.
The best that we can do is give it an estimate that makes sense based on everything else. And our estimate is 20,000 and up for the largest piece, the 20 pesos. But we'll see. You know, the other thing that comes into play is whether the same person wants to own all the specimens, and that's when it really gets exciting.
You also have a great selection of Cobs that were struck in the 18th century. Among the lots that you're offering, do you have a few favorites, a few pieces that really stand out?
Oh, well, in Cobs, boy, there's no end to the amount of things I could mention there. They're very typically we will get a lot of different, what I would call trophy coins in any given auction, because we are the strongest market for that type of material. And I try to group it into different mints that we cover, all the different mints in the New World. And in each mint, I've got some very big highlights. It starts with the Mexico City Mint, where we've got the finest known 3 reales, which is an interesting denomination in and of itself, very briefly done. But this particular one has waves below the pillars, which is unique to that denomination and just for part of that production. This is one of only two known that are in problem-free condition. The other one is in the Banco de Mexico. So this is a very important opportunity for collectors of that type of material. But then you get into the gold cobs of Mexico, and we've got some unique things there too. The most important one in this auction is an eight escudos dated 1715 that is designated as MS-64 from the 1715 fleet, but there's something clearly special about this piece. It's perfectly round and has much more strike evident than you would normally see for this issue. It's not what we would call a royal, or the new term from the documentation is galano, because it is known that the royals for this year have a different die and a different texture entirely. But what's interesting about this piece is that in 1972, this very coin was offered by Schulman in New York among the gold coins being sold by the Real 8 company that salvaged the 1715 fleet in that time. And this coin was given a very special presentation in the catalog, and we even in our auction we quote that catalog and as saying a coin not struck for the public but for the king only and things like that. So this is when you put it all together, this is definitely a coin that will appeal to a lot of people, but particularly to the shipwreck people that we cater to quite a bit. But then, like I say, that's just Mexico. If you get into other mints, like we have a number of very important Santo Domingo mint pieces, which are quite rare, and we certainly don't have those in every auction. In Lima and Potosi are our usual mainstays. We've got a lot of important pieces. One of the most exciting ones for me is in the Lima pieces. We have what's known as a Star of Lima 8 reales. That is a very brief issue from 1659 to 1660 that was actually not authorized by the king. The viceroy took it upon himself to make some coins at a time when Lima was closed, was officially supposed to be closed. And so the coins were struck without authorization, and there's some evidence that samples were being sent back to the king and never made it, and so it continued. As soon as the king found out about it, he put a stop to it. But what's exciting about this particular piece that we have in the auction is that it's a very limited type where they simply forgot to put the date in the design of the coin. It's from 1660. We know that by the style of the design, but you see the whole central portion of the coin, and there's no date as there should be. So we're excited to see what that will do. There are quite a number of but again, I use the term royal, but the popular term now is galano, which are the round presentation pieces. We have those throughout all the mints, Mexico, Lima, and Potosi. Again, when we're talking about Peru, Lima, Peru, we have to talk about the gold. And we have a very long run of Lima gold cobs in this auction, mostly from the 1715 fleet, like the Mexican piece that I mentioned, but some also that are later dates. But we have a near complete run starting in 1701. I guess there are some gaps, but from 1708 all the way to 1718, we have a complete date run, and all in top grades and really beautiful pieces.
You also have in your auction another amazing coin from the same country. This one was struck just 100 years later, but to me it stands out as one of the most beautiful and distinctive designs of the period. The design features a sun and a volcano, a castle, a ship, and a cornucopia. It's a truly beautiful design from Peru.
Oh, I totally agree. It's definitely one of my favorite coins as far as design goes and execution as well. There's so much artistic symbolism going on here. I really think it would be hard for anybody in the coin field or outside the coin field not to appreciate the artistry in this piece. We have had one just like it before. It is an issue where there are a handful of really choice pieces for whatever reason, whether they were the first strikes and were saved or what, but the one that we have right now is acknowledged as the finest known. It's graded NGC MS-64 plus proof-like. So that gives you an idea. It's simply beautiful in every way, both the design, the quality of strike, and then of course the grade, the technical grade.
Let's switch gear and talk about ingots. You typically will have ingots in your sale, but in this sale you have both modern and, for lack of a better term, classic ingots. What differentiates the two in terms of quality and the size of their collecting base?
Well, there's a lot of difference, and as a matter of fact, it's funny that it's rather unusual for us, but we happen to have a more modern ingot in this auction too, and we're excited about that one as well. It's a gold piece from the New York Assay Office, I believe 1959 or something like that. And it's a little ingot, but it definitely is in the flavor of the U.S. Assay Office ingots that you see from, for example, the Central America, SS Central America Shipwreck. Quite a bit later, but that flavor. Totally different from the early Spanish ingots, which is mostly what we have and usually have. We have our usual kind of run of copper, gold, and silver, but what we're perhaps most excited about for this auction is a pair of the usual large silver bars. They look like bread loaves, but they're 80 pounds. From the Atocha shipwreck. Anybody connected with shipwrecks is very familiar with these. They found about 1,000 of them, but somehow over the years they've all found homes and have gotten quite scarce. There was a time when it would be expected to pay around melt value for one of these pieces, but now there's actually a collector market and they sell for multiples. The two that we have in this auction, what makes them special is that they are both dated. And for whatever reason, the marking of the date on these pieces was among the faintest of markings, not very deep, not very deeply impressed. And so with a little bit of corrosion, the date was pretty much the first thing to go. So you have to have some pretty high-grade bars in terms of preservation to bring up the date in the first place. And what's neat is that one of them is dated 1621 and the other one's dated 1622. So they make a very nice pair. They are both from the Potosi mine, which is a figure that appears right before the date. It shows PO for Potosi. The other type of ingot that we see in this grouping is from the Oruro mine. You can also tell the difference by the way they have the assayer's bite, which was the little test pinch to see the fineness check the fineness of the silver by the assayer. Anyway, these are the two that we have from Potosi, dated 1621, 1622. I think that they're both estimated at 30,000 and up, and we expect to get every bit of that.
And these pieces with these stamps on them and their primitive appearance, they're just fantastic. And to just give people a sense of the scale of these ingots, they measure over a foot long.
Yeah, they do vary a little bit, but they're generally around 13, 14 inches or so. And like I say, they're kind of shaped like bread loaves. And I don't know whether they are ever from identical molds, but probably they were. And just it was a matter of how the silver flowed within that mold. Sometimes you'll see pieces of charcoal in the side that just kind of got into the mix when they were pouring it. Yeah, they're fairly standard shape. Some of the other ingots that we have are a little bit more neatly formed. They are the Dutch ingots that you see from 1700s shipwrecks, and they have very tight corners and very smooth surfaces in comparison to the cruder Spanish bars. And so, like I say, we typically have some of those in every auction, and this is no exception. The markings are a little more sparse on that type. I should also mention that we have an example of one of the earliest type of silver bars made in the New World, and that's the Tumbaga bar. And the timing is good. Our Vice President, Augie, has just come out with a second edition of his book about Tumbaga bars and has added a lot more photos and new information. And so we expect to have a lot of interest in this, the Tumbaga bar that's in this sale. Tumbaga is referring to the fact that it was made from a mixed metal, a mixture of copper and silver that was actually native to the Tarascan culture in Mexico. Tumbaga is a bit of a misnomer. In his book, this edition of his book, Augie goes into some of the origin and derivation of the word Tumbaga, and I believe it comes from the Caribbean originally. If you follow the wording back a little bit, I think he found the actual first document to use the term Tumbaga was in the early 1700s in Philippines. So it was a term that was being used throughout the Spanish territories, but it was generally used to refer to gold and not to silver. But for whatever reason, that's what got attached to this when the shipwreck of these bars was found in the 1990s. And it's just kind of stuck. It's like the royal terminology I used before. Galano is probably more correct, but we say royal. And here, perhaps we should say these bars are metal of Michoacan because they come from the Michoacan area of Mexico. But that's a little bit more of a mouthful, and it's easier just to say Tumbaga.
One of the things that I find most fascinating when I look at these pieces, in each one of them we see the story of the economic power that the Western Hemisphere would bring to bear in reshaping the world. The fact that the Europeans would go to such lengths to exploit the mineral resources of the Americas is illustrative of just how mineral poor the European powers had become by the time you get to the 16th and 17th centuries, and how vital the infusion of new capital was to fund these European empires before the Industrial Revolution created vast amounts of new wealth. It's also the story of how this hemisphere carved out a path apart from Europe to become the truly powerful economic force that it is today. And so, as is the case with everything numismatic, the object tells a story. And the story of these objects is really, in many ways, an important part of the story of us.
Yeah, that's true. It's a bit of a double-edged sword because at that time around the world, everyone knew about a place in what is now Bolivia, at the top of a mountain in the middle of the Andes that would otherwise be not even a speck on a map, but a place called Potosi. And at the time, everyone around the world knew what Potosi was, and they had expressions that referred to the town Potosi. Was considered one of the metropolises of Latin America. I was there just a couple years ago, and I can tell you it's hardly a metropolis now. But back at the time, it became a very important place for around the world simply because it yielded most of the world's silver at the time. This was silver that circulated all around the world, and unfortunately, because it all left there and it was all exploited, as you say, the human element was kind of left behind, and now that's most of Latin America is a bit like that, where it's the elements have been exploited and the rest was kind of left for dead. But it's coming back. The collector market, I think, within Latin America is starting to appreciate that this is their heritage, this is their patrimony in a way, and to have the opportunity to buy and collect this material should be and is very important to them now.
Well, it certainly shows how important this material is to us now, as these ingots are viewed by collectors as much more valuable than the full measure of their intrinsic worth. We are fortunate to even have these things available to us today.
Yes, and one thing that kind of gets forgotten about in all of this is that if it weren't for shipwrecks and the ability to salvage shipwrecks, these things simply would not exist. If you take the Tumbaga bars, for example, it's an excellent example because when my partner Augie did the first edition of his book, he got in touch with some, Mesoamerican specialists who had nothing to do with coins or shipwrecks or anything outside of just the study of the cultures. They knew that these things, which we call Tumbaga bars, but were, like I say, properly known as metal of Michoacan, they knew that these things were made and existed in their time, but they certainly never in their wildest dreams thought that those things still existed. And they wouldn't, in fact, exist at all if it weren't for the fact that many of them were lost on a shipwreck and recovered in our time, like I say, in the 1990s. And we see this in a lot of numismatic areas as well. Something that was practically unknown or maybe very rare at best, all of a sudden a shipwreck comes along and there's hundreds of the items that were missing for so many years or centuries. Sometimes it has a market effect, but most of the time it's the opposite. It creates excitement, and it gives hope to these people who had an interest in this area outside of the shipwrecks that, hey, now they can actually have this, and they can collect this, and they can study it. It really propels the notion that shipwrecks are very important and should continue to be salvaged in our time, which is an uphill battle. There's a lot of resistance in the archaeological community to do just that. But we remain hopeful that shipwreck salvage will continue in the future.
Well, that is a true point. And like I said, numismatics is really a story of now and what we do to preserve this material and to research it and enjoy it. Not only is the discovery of this material important for our hobby, but even more so is the amount of quality work being done to provide us with a better and more full understanding of this material and its purpose and origins. Even today, new treasure is washing ashore on the Florida coast. Items thought lost centuries ago are being recovered, and so too, new facts and information is coming to light. With Augie's research and the research of others, paving the way to a better understanding of this period in our numismatic history. So Daniel, I wish you luck at your big treasure auction this week, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to share your personal insights about several of the pieces that you will be offering when the live session kicks off on the 2nd.
Thank you so much.
If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends. And also remember, you can download more than 100 episodes of the CoinWeek podcast for free on the iTunes store. For CoinWeek, I'm editor Charles Morgan. Until next time, happy collecting.